My name is Father Daniel Marsh, and I am 68 years old. I spent 42 of those years as a Catholic priest and 28 of them as a diocesan exorcist for the Archdiocese covering southern Pennsylvania and northern Maryland. I have spoken the words of the Roman ritual in Latin from memory. I have commanded spirits to depart in the name of Christ. I have looked into the faces of desperate, suffering people and told them that God had given me the authority to drive out their demons. And for nearly 3 decades, I believed that with my whole heart. I believed the church had trained me to fight spiritual darkness. I believed the ritual worked because the church said it worked. I believed I was doing sacred work that mattered in ways ordinary ministry never could. But in the winter of 2009, I walked into a house outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I found something that shattered every assumption I had ever made about evil, about faith, and about the institution I had served without question for my entire adult life. What I found in that house was not demonic possession. It was something the church had no script for, no ritual to address, and no interest in acknowledging. And when I tried to tell the truth about what I had seen, the same institution that had given me authority to bind demons used that authority to bind me into silence. I am telling you this now because I am old, because the woman I failed deserves to have her story told, and because if you are watching this and you have ever trusted an institution more than your own conscience, you need to hear what happens when those two things collide. If this story matters to you, if you believe that truth deserves to be spoken even when it is inconvenient and painful, then please subscribe to this channel, press the like button, and activate the notification bell so that these testimonies reach the people who need to hear them. These are not entertainment. These are confessions, and they only matter if someone is willing to listen. I was ordained in 1981 in a small ceremony in Pittsburgh. I came from a working-class Catholic family where faith was not optional. My mother prayed the rosary every night. My father took communion every Sunday before his shift at the rail yard. When the bishop told me I had a gift for pastoral care, when he said he saw something in me that could be used for the church's most sacred and difficult work, I felt chosen. And I felt like God himself had reached down and marked me for something extraordinary. By 1995, I was the diocesan exorcist. The role came with training, with manuals, with procedures written in Rome, and handed down through centuries of tradition. I attended a week-long seminar at the Vatican where elderly Jesuit priests taught us how to discern genuine possession from mental illness, how to recognize the signs, how to perform the ritual with precision and authority. They told us that most cases were psychological, that our job was to refer people to doctors and therapists, and that true demonic possession was exceedingly rare. But when it did occur, they said, the church had the power through Christ to expel it. I believed them completely. I performed maybe 15 exorcisms over the years. Most were exactly what the training predicted, on that people suffering from trauma or mental illness who needed psychiatric help, not spiritual intervention. I referred them. I prayed with them. I did what I was trained to do. But there were 2 or 3 cases over the years where I genuinely believed I was confronting something beyond psychology. A young man in Altoona who spoke fluent Aramaic, despite having no education. A woman in Scranton who knew things about my past that no one could have known. I performed the ritual. I said the words, and in both cases the behavior stopped. I credited the power of Christ working through the church. I believed the system worked. The call came in late January of 2009. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was at the rectory finishing paperwork when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was a man named Paul. He was calling about his wife, a 34-year-old woman named Grace. Paul said Grace had been increasingly erratic over the past 6 months. She was having violent outbursts, speaking in ways that did not sound like her, and claiming she could see things that were not there. They had taken her to 3 different doctors. They had tried medication. Nothing worked. The local parish priest had suggested they contact me. Paul's voice was steady but desperate. He said he did not know what else to do. I told him I would come assess the situation the following week. I drove to their home on a gray, cold morning in early February. The house was a small 2-story colonial outside Harrisburg, modest and well-kept. Paul met me at the door. He was thin, pale, and looked like he had not slept in days. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. Grace was upstairs in the bedroom. Paul said she had been there for 3 days, refusing to come out, refusing to eat. When I walked into that bedroom, I saw a woman sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to the door. She was thin, her hair unwashed, her hands folded in her lap. She did not turn around when I entered. I introduced myself. I told her I was a priest and that I was there to help. She said nothing. Then, very slowly, she turned to face me. Her eyes were clear, not wild, not distant, not possessed, clear and completely, devastatingly sane. She looked at me and said, "Father, I am not possessed by a demon. I am being abused by my husband. And I have been trying to tell someone for 6 months, but no one will listen, because everyone thinks I am crazy." The room went silent. Paul, standing behind me in the doorway, did not move. Grace continued. She said Paul had been physically and emotionally abusing her for years. She said it had escalated 6 months ago when she threatened to leave. She said he had isolated her from her family, controlled her finances, monitored her phone calls, and told everyone she was mentally unstable. She said she had tried to tell her doctor, but Paul was always in the room. She had tried to tell the parish priest, but Paul was a respected member of the church, and she was dismissed as dramatic. She said the outbursts, the erratic behavior, the strange speech, it was all her trying to get someone, anyone, to pay attention. She had escalated her behavior, hoping someone would finally see past Paul's narrative and recognize what was happening. She looked at me with absolute clarity and said, "Father, you are the first person who has come into this room alone. You are the first person he could not control the narrative with. Please, please believe me." I believed her. In that moment, standing in that quiet bedroom, I believed every word she said. I looked at Paul standing in the doorway. His face had gone completely still, not surprised, not defensive, just still. The kind of stillness that comes from a man who has just realized his script is no longer working. I told Paul to leave the room. He hesitated. I repeated myself, this time with the full authority of a priest used to being obeyed. He left. I spent the next 40 minutes with Grace. She told me everything, the years of control, the escalation, the bruises she had learned to hide, the fear she lived with every single day. She told me she had been praying for months that someone would see her, really see her, and understand that she was not sick. She was trapped. When I left that room, I told Paul I would not be performing an exorcism. I told him I believed his wife needed safety, not spiritual intervention. I told him I was going to make some calls. His face hardened into something cold and calculated. He said that was unfortunate. He said the parish priest had assured him the church would help. He said he would be calling the bishop. If you are still watching, if this testimony is reaching you in a moment when you are questioning an institution, questioning authority, questioning whether the truth you see with your own eyes is more important than the narrative you have been told to believe, then let this be your sign. Subscribe to this channel. Like this video. Activate the notification bell, because what I am about to tell you next is what happens when you choose truth over institutional loyalty, and you need to be prepared for that cost. I did not call the bishop immediately. I called a domestic violence hotline. I spoke to an advocate who connected me with a social worker. I arranged for Grace to be assessed independently, outside of Paul's presence, by a licensed therapist who specialized in abuse. The therapist confirmed what Grace had told me. She documented injuries. She confirmed the pattern of control. She helped Grace develop a safety plan. I reported Paul's behavior to the local authorities. I provided my testimony as a witness. I did everything I had been trained to do as a human being with a conscience. Then the bishop called me. He was not pleased. He said Paul had contacted him. He said Paul was a long-time contributor to the parish, a well-respected member of the community, and that I had overstepped my role. He said my job was to assess spiritual matters, not to involve secular authorities in private family disputes. I told him this was not a spiritual matter. This was abuse. He said I had caused significant embarrassment to the church by contradicting the parish priest's recommendation. He said the optics were terrible, that it looked like the church could not get its own story straight, and that I needed to step back and let the parish handle it internally. I refused. The bishop called me again 2 days later. This time his tone was different, colder. He said he had received complaints about my conduct, that I had violated the confidentiality of pastoral care, and that my involvement in Grace's situation was inappropriate and outside the scope of my duties as an exorcist. He reminded me that exorcists served at the discretion of the bishop. He suggested I take some time to reflect on my priorities. I understood what he was saying. I was being told to choose between my role in the church and my conscience. I chose my conscience. I continued to support Grace. I testified on her behalf in court. Paul was eventually charged. Grace left him. She rebuilt her life, and I was quietly removed from my position as diocesan exorcist 3 months later. The bishop told me it was not a punishment. He said the role was being restructured, that they were bringing in someone with more recent training, and that my decades of service were deeply appreciated. He said it with the kind of institutional politeness that makes it clear the conversation is over. I was reassigned to a rural parish in western Maryland, small, quiet, out of the way. I spent the next 6 years there preaching to congregations of 30 or 40 people, performing baptisms and weddings and funerals, doing all the ordinary work of parish life. And I said nothing. I did not speak publicly about what had happened. I did not challenge the bishop. I told myself I had done the right thing, that Grace was safe, and that was enough. But the silence ate at me. The silence ate at me because I knew what I had seen. I had walked into that house expecting to confront a demon, and I had found a woman being abused by her husband while the church looked the other way. I had found a system that prioritized the reputation of a male church member over the safety of a woman. I had found an institution that would rather call a woman possessed than acknowledge that one of its own was an abuser. And when I tried to tell the truth, I was silenced, not dramatically, not with scandal or public rebuke, just quietly reassigned, quietly removed, quietly told that my conscience was less important than the church's image. That is how institutions protect themselves, not with threats, with polite, quiet, structural violence. I retired in 2015. I left ministry entirely. I could not continue performing sacraments in an institution that I no longer trusted. For the first few years, I attended Mass out of habit. I prayed the rosary because it was the only prayer I knew, but I felt nothing. I was going through the motions of faith without any real connection to God. Then, 2 years ago, I stopped. I stopped going to Mass. I stopped formal prayers. I stopped trying to be a good institutional priest. And in that silence, I found something I had not expected. I found Jesus. Not the Jesus of hierarchy and procedure. Not the Jesus who required 2 witnesses and documentation, but the Jesus of the Gospels who ate with outcasts, who challenged authority, who wept for the suffering, who overturned tables when institutions became corrupt. The Jesus who would have walked into that house in Harrisburg, seen Grace, and believed her immediately without needing a bishop's permission. If you have watched this far, if you are wrestling with your own moment of institutional betrayal, if you are deciding whether to speak or stay silent, then do this one thing: subscribe, like this video, activate the notification bell, not for me, for every person who will come after you wrestling with the same choice. These testimonies only matter if they are heard. Grace reached out to me last year. She found me through a mutual contact. She wanted to thank me. She said that when I walked into that room and believed her, it was the first time in years she had felt human. She said she had rebuilt her life, that she was safe, that she was healing. She said she wished the church had done more, but she was grateful that one person had chosen to see her. I told her I was sorry it had taken someone like me, someone with authority, for her to be believed. I told her that should never have been necessary. She said she knew. We spoke for an hour. And when the call ended, I sat in my kitchen and I wept, not for myself, for every person who had walked into a church asking for help and been met with procedure instead of mercy. I do not know if I believe in demonic possession anymore. I have seen too much human evil wrapped in spiritual language to trust that framework. But I know this: the greatest evil I ever encountered was not supernatural. It was institutional. It was a system that prioritized its own reputation over the safety of a vulnerable woman. It was a hierarchy that would rather silence a priest than admit it had been wrong. It was a church that used the language of God to protect an abuser. That is the demon I found in that house. Not a spirit, not a possession, but a structure of power that crushes the people it claims to serve. I am telling you this now because Grace deserves to have someone tell the truth about what happened, because every person who has been dismissed, disbelieved, or silenced by an institution deserves a witness. And because the Jesus I have finally found outside the walls of the church is the Jesus who said, "Let the little ones come to me," and meant it. That Jesus already knows who I am. That Jesus does not need a bishop's approval. That Jesus is not afraid of the truth. If this testimony has meant something to you, if it has challenged you or comforted you or made you think, then subscribe to this channel, like this video, and activate that notification bell. These stories only survive if people are willing to hear them. Grace was right. She was not possessed. She was telling the truth. And the institution that was supposed to protect her chose power instead. Remember her. Remember that institutional evil is real, and that good people participate in it when they choose comfort over courage. I am the witness. This is what I saw. This is what I know. And God forgive me for how long it took to say it out loud.